Okay. Hi, everybody. Um, Either if you're listening to this live or on screen, I did fiddle with my mic a bit, so hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I did check what I sounded like beforehand. It sounded pretty good. Maybe I'll just. Okay. I might even raise that a little bit more. Just one second while I alter something. Because I know it's been an issue, kind of, or whatever, and I think I can get a better sound out of this just with a few altered settings. So hopefully that sounds good and is clear. Let me know if it does not. Oh yeah, I can hear it. So let me. Okay, so that sounds good to me. Um, Great. Hi everyone. Today we are talking about the Crime Syndicate series. Sorry for the weird opening, but you know, it's better to get all these things out of the way now so it all looks and sounds good. I might try and get my light level a little higher. Yeah, okay, whatever. I'm so one-sided because of where I'm sitting. Okay, whatever. I think it looks alright. Now I'm fretting over stuff. But yeah, so back in 2021, I picked up this entire series, and I mean, like, I have all 6 issues here. Da, 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 but I this was right after Infinite Frontier, and was just kind of curious about this, and had always been a bit of a fan of this team. This is not the introduction. Oh yeah, I don't need these on. That will probably be easier for me. For some reason, I'm wearing noise canceling headphones at the start. Well, I was checking the audio, but yeah, I don't need to be wearing that for this whole thing. Yeah, I quite enjoyed what I saw from this series. I'm going to talk a little bit about where it's limited, but the team itself, I think, is a really cool idea. Whenever they show up, it's always just fun to have all of our normal superheroes just flipped on a coin and turned evil. And there's that really good animated movie, I think, called Crisis of Two Earths, where I think like James Woods is voicing Owlman, and all of the Crime Syndicate, the team, is done really well. And that, I think, might have been my original introduction to them. Like, I'd heard of them before, but hadn't really experienced the story of them. And this was like a decade ago now, because since then I've read them in back in the old books when they were introduced, and other weird little crisis events where they would show up. Their memorable death of I'm pretty sure he dies in Crisis of Infinite Earths, and stuff like that. So they can be quite fun. And then, of course, I almost forgot to mention the Injustice event from New 52, which, it wasn't perfect. No, Forever Evil event. That's why I'm like, I'm not saying that right. Forever Evil from New 52, which I don't know about other people, but I enjoyed more than I didn't, and found it was a pretty worthy event, relatively speaking, especially by New 52 standards, and definitely kind of was a relative high point for that particular era of DC. David Martinez says my introduction was the Crisis on Two Earths animated movie. What an awesome movie, especially Owlman. I agree, and I think as far as introductions go to the Crime Syndicate, that and maybe the Forever Evil comic books are probably the best. The old original comics with them are fun but a little dated, but that movie is solid. And I haven't rewatched it in a while, but I have seen like some of the best of moments on YouTube and stuff like that, and it still holds up as far as I can tell. And especially Owlman, like David was saying, I strongly agree with. Sorry, because what's it called? They really, even more than I think they often do in the comics, they really pulled off like this nihilism in Owlman that I think was really nicely expressed. And I still remember that scene where he gets defeated and dies, and he just says, "Oh, it doesn't matter." And I think there's no greater expression of that character I've seen in any iteration of this team. So, and I don't even mind kind of starting off with this review with it. Yeah, I would start there for sure if you're looking for an introduction to this team or Forever Evil or something like that, because this is good, but I don't know if I'd start here with this. It's a fun expression of them. It's a fun version of the team in a like relatively modern age, having only come out 2 years ago. The art is fantastic, and that's a big selling point. We have, I have them all right here, but like, here I'm gonna pull it open because I always get like I don't know, obviously the letters and stuff, but yeah, Kieran McEwen does the penciling, Dexter Vines inks, Steve Olive does the coloring. I think Brian Hitch does the backup stories, if I'm reading this correctly. Oh no, he does the art for them. That's why I was confused. And Alex Sinclair, because Hitch is a really memorable artist, and they do these little bonus stories that kind of go over the origins of each of the Crime Syndicate in these issues, and those are solid. And Hitch's artwork really stands out for that, but also McEwen does a really good job too. And these books have that vivid, but also that crisp quality that I find a lot of the Infinite Crisis books seem to pull. That I quite appreciate. They really look polished, and if you're kind of looking at the art as it's scrolling through here, it looks good in my opinion. Obviously some of those are alternate covers and stuff like that, but most of them are pretty representative of what's in the book, and some of them are pages as we're going by, and I really liked the artwork here. I think it was solid and probably the best selling point of these books. And everything is written, I think, yeah, it looks like even the bonus stories were written by Andy Schmidt, who is a writer. Like, it's not the first time I've read one of his books out there, but the thing is, I find him not as memorable or leaving as many impressions on me like other writers. So a good example for that is Crisis on Two Earths. Yeah, I've seen that clip since I first watched the movie, but I wouldn't have had to remember that scene with James Woods going like, oh, that doesn't matter, because it's just so interesting of a villain to lose so profoundly and fundamentally not care. So I liked that side of it quite a bit. Where I found it a little more, I guess, in between or something is oh shoot, I completely lost. Yeah. So the thing is, I read these books in 2021 is what I'm getting at, and then when I kind of dug them out of my desk drawer, I was like, oh, I've never talked about this series, and I had enough fun. I couldn't really remember a thing compared to those like crisp and clean moments that were right in my brain from Crisis on Two Earths, and I think that kind of expresses what I was saying about like Schmidt. He's a good writer and very competent. I don't have like, oh, he didn't do X, Y, and Z along the way. And a lot of the backup stories that go over the origins of the Crime Syndicate, to be fair, were full of memorable moments. But outside of, some stuff here and there I'll talk about that were pretty good. And I did remember once I started flipping through these books a little bit, a lot of it was pretty forgettable. And that kind of sucks because this is a mini series. Like, it's a limited series. It only ran for 6 issues, and so you only get so much time with these characters, and I would have really preferred it excel a little bit more. And I'll get into where I think it falters and where I think it's stronger, because there are aspects of this I like, and I think, in spite of these criticisms, I would recommend it. It was a pleasant read when I first read it in 2021, and I remember liking it. I just found it really telling that when I started working on this stream, like, I went through these books before I reviewed this, obviously, because otherwise I would be running out of stuff to say really quick. But I noticed when I was starting all of this that I didn't remember a lot of these things, and I think that's a little telling. David Martinez says that he agrees. They were more memorable in Forever Evil and the JLA Earth 3 comic. That's a really good point. That comic he's talking about is so good. I've read that book. I don't know what it's called either, but it was in the 90s, I think, or maybe early 2000s that it came out. It was by, was it written by Grant Morrison? But it was by those guys around those times. Maybe it was written by Mark Waid, but whoever did it, oh, maybe that was Grant Morrison. Um, that was a really memorable and awesome book, and that's another solid introduction to the Crime Syndicate. I am looking it up because I can't drop a name like Grant Morrison and not remember if I talked about them or not. So let's see here. Post Crisis. Yeah, that was by Grant Morrison, and it's just called JLA Earth 2, and the art was by Frank Quietly, which is solid artwork. I believe I've talked about it before in some form or another on this channel because I remember reading it for that purpose. Maybe I was doing it for like a history of the characters or something like that, but either way, solid recommendation for me. Thank you, David Martinez, for reminding me that book exists. I can't believe I forgot about it talking about the Crime Syndicate, but that's just funny. I just blipped on that whole era of comic books and like, oh yeah, they talked about the Crime Syndicate and had some really fun stuff with them too. But that's why I like doing these reviews live sometimes, because I forget stuff. And David Martinez puts a thumbs up. So let's talk about these books a little bit more in detail. Really, like, you can divide it in two. These first three books are all kind of about the Crime Syndicate dealing with the Starro invasion. There's sort of a theme of them being like up and comers. There's a really solid opening, and one of the pages keeps going by of it along the way where it's oh, I'm pointing the wrong way towards the page, but whatever. I need OBS up so I can see these things. You know, I like it because it's a throwback to the very first Justice League or whatever comic book no, it is Justice League of America by Guy Gardner, where they go up against Starro. So I liked that side of it. But the thing is, that book did it for their first issue. And in this first issue, hi Tevia, by the way, I see you in chat there. They do, like, it's great. They're fighting Starro. They're being their brutal, insane selves. They, various versions of them are getting mind controlled. And so there's all that, we'll say horror, but it's also played for a lot of laughs with, you know, their version of the Flash, whatever he's called. What is it? Quick, Johnny Quick, I believe. It's all good fun. And yeah, like, there's this great moment where Ultraman gets controlled and stuff like that, and it all works well because that's Starro doing his thing. I really wish, though, that it was just this book. Like the first one, you only have 6 issues, so why not just do a Starro issue, put it down, and then do your other 5 books about something else. Now, to its credit, we do eventually do that, but before that, the next 2 books are about Starro being defeated and stuff, and it's fine, it's not a big deal, but it overstays its welcome, and by far, I think the worst 2 issues of this series are 2 and 3. Tevi Smoka said, speaking of Crime Syndicate, this version of that team did reappear in the War for 3 event, which really went nowhere. Yeah, I've kind of noticed that some of the DC events, like lately, or like even the stuff with Dark Crisis, kind of, I don't know, I've read some of it, so I haven't read all of it. I'm not going to speak on it too much, but it didn't really get to me too much. But anyways, they did have a great opening to this first book with, I was going to say, it's John F. Kennedy, I believe, like dressed in this like military dictator uniform and being assassinated, if I am reading that what's it called, that scene correctly, and I thought that was great. So there's little moments like that, especially in the first issue, I found really strong, but issues 2 and 3 are where it kind of loses me a bit. I mean, Starro gets obliterated, which is a great moment, so it's not terrible. You know, I like some of it, and there are like fun lines along the way. David Martinez says, last event I cared about was Dark Knight's Metal. I mean, I'm kind of with you, I guess, is what I meant to say. That's the last event that I've read and did dedicated reviews towards and stuff like that. I've kind of fallen behind a little bit in doing some of these reviews. Hey, Genko, glad to see you too. Losing footage on YouTube for some reason, but it says excellent connection, so I'm going to assume that it's all right. Tevi is saying, I am also annoyed that this version of Ultraman also appeared in the Adventure of John Ken book and then got taken out by somebody, which makes nonsense to me. I haven't read that, can't speak on that. It's interesting that they brought in these characters to do Infinite Frontier stuff, and then it kind of just hasn't gone anywhere. But until I read those books themselves, I will mostly focus on this. Oh, I am slowing down on connection. Let me see if I can work on that for a second. I appear to be sputtering out with lag for a minute, so I'm just gonna close some programs. Oh, I didn't really even have much open, but yeah, that can stay open. You can close, I guess. Okay, so you guys might experience some lagging if you are watching this live for a moment. It does appear to be slowly catching up, so luckily I wasn't talking a lot through the lag, so it didn't really matter anyways. Tevye said, because how does this Ultraman know who John Kent is if he doesn't meet John Kent? Oh, I kind of do remember that. Whatever. I think he just kind of recognizes that he's like a Kryptonian and a kid with the whole generic memory graft that all of these characters got post Infinite Crisis. That's how stuff like that happens. But anyways, we're going to focus on this book for now because Tevye always likes to talk about John Kent. But so those 3 books happen with Starro. And like I said, it was good. It has its moments and stuff. But it definitely kind of overstays its welcome after a hot minute. But then, thankfully, I think where this series would have really had problems with me and where I would struggle to give it a recommendation is if it was all about Starro and them going up against Starro, because that would suck. But the next 3 books are about Lex Luthor forming this Legion of Justice, as this one cover shows, teaming up with various what we would traditionally identify as villains and going up against the Crime Syndicate, trying to take them down. It's not necessarily something that we haven't seen before, even in, say, the opening of Crisis on Earth 2, but I thoroughly enjoyed it just the same. Lex Luthor, I felt, had like a pretty good little story here and a solid ending. They actually do manage to take out one of the Crime Syndicate, and there's enough in here that I was kind of like looking through these books and it's like, yeah, maybe I don't want to spoil X, Y, and Z along the way. We'll see where things go with chat. Sometimes those spoilers do hold up, sometimes they don't, but for now I think I will leave it and just be like, yeah, it was really some solid moments. A few unexpected characters show up, and it even kind of ends things on a fun note, showing other villains like the Joker kind of building themselves up to potentially take on the Crime Syndicate once again. That's, I think, part of the extreme fun of these kind of stories. And to Schmidt's credit, I was saying like he's a little lacking in those memorable moments, but I remember feeling like I was rooting for the Legion of Justice to actually take down the Crime Syndicate. I was rooting against the Crime Syndicate, which is a fun feeling because it leaves you like rooting for Lex Luthor and Titanica, Poison Ivy, all these characters that traditionally come across as villains. Get to have their moment in the sun. Sinestro, has a few fun bits here, and all of that works really well in my opinion. I found so without getting into how it goes, the neat thing about this alternate universe stuff is both sides, I felt while reading this, had a legitimate chance of winning. When it's a regular Justice League story, especially in just like a limited series like this, outside of the alternate universe things, the Justice League is probably going to come out on top. And often those stories where like the main team doesn't win can be narratively unsatisfying, but here it can work pretty well either way. It's a Crime Syndicate story, but those characters aren't exactly super sympathetic as human beings, and I don't feel a particular amount of empathy towards them. They're brutal, they're like simplistic. Power Woman at one point talks about having a child with Ultraman, and he acts so like dense around it. It's really something else. So I had quite a bit of fun, like kind of not knowing where the story was going to go, because you're kind of rooting against the Crime Syndicate, but it is also their story, so it isn't terribly unsatisfying if they were to win. But on the other hand, I felt that these Legion of Justice characters were heroic enough and fun enough that it would have been cool, like, should they win too. Um, and how it all ends, I feel, was pretty satisfying, even if it didn't necessarily go in the traditional direction of a story. So that's all I'm going to talk about of the story for now. I find with Chad, it either will go one way or another. Like, maybe we will kind of get into how this all resolves a bit, but for now, I'm going to leave it like that. I was gonna avoid some spoilers entirely, but I did see they were pretty heavily spoiled just when I was pulling images for this review by other reviews. So I guess it's not that big a deal, but there are some good surprises along the way. So if you're watching this after the fact, or if you're live now and you haven't read this series and it sounds good enough, like, the art's a big selling point for sure. And I know that matters a lot to people. Someone just had a really nice message they wrote about that and how much it matters to them. And, you know, I always try and talk about the art for that reason. And I feel they're beautiful books. But they're not my first choice for introducing someone to the Crime Syndicate, for example. They're fun additions to the family of Crime Syndicate books out there and stories, like the Crisis on Two Earths movie, such that it becomes a worthwhile addition, but it definitely isn't where I'd start people off. Oh, and it's Superwoman, not Power Woman, by the way. I said that earlier, and I was like, that didn't sound right in my head. Nick Wilson, thanks for joining us. I saw you were in chat earlier. I just, sometimes I get on a thought track and need to get it out, or else I'll completely lose track of what I was saying, which almost very nearly happened in this review a few times. So it's a little hard live, because you're juggling all those things. So I do sometimes just need to get certain thoughts out, but that was the main thrust of what I had to say. But there's plenty of stuff in chat now, so I'm going to kind of catch up on that a little bit. Because Tevi was saying, as for the Crime Syndicate book, it's an interesting take on the Crime Syndicate. Not great, but not bad, just okay at best. That's kind of my sentiment. I do think it's worth reading and would probably recommend, but you do have to, I guess, rationale with it. So, for example, I just subscribe to this book with these books with my comic book shop, and kind of have these books budgeted into my life. Not like these books specifically, but I mean like the comic books I buy. So it's not a big deal to me that I paid however much for this series. But, you know, to a consumer who has a limited budget on these comics and might need needing to pick for some, I wouldn't be necessarily recommending this for full price, but if you can get a good deal on Comixology, or if you find them in a bin at a store, or like the trade for a good price, all of those things I would definitely recommend. And some sort of discount, as opposed to the $3.99 per issue, then it's pretty rock solid. And even then, like, $3.99 as opposed to $4.99 is definitely a lot more palatable. So let's, as Tevi was saying, also, I did like Supergirl in the Crime Syndicate book. It was interesting to see that character. So I did see that he put that in chat and kind of had an internal debate about whether or not we were going to spoil it. But like I said, I was going to leave it up to chat. She was one of the surprises I mentioned, and I found her reveal really fun because you kind of know she's not going to come across as a good person in this story, but it is still fun to have someone appear who can truly put Ultraman in his place, and that was great. That's a great example of one of those moments that I really did like, even if, like I said, I needed the book to jog my memory a little bit because I had forgotten about it. And what else do you have, Tevia? I know this may sound controversial, but waist swapping Earth 3 Lex Luthor from a redhead to a black man just felt like a really bad idea in my opinion, but I get it's an alternate universe, so maybe. I mean, at a certain point, who cares, right? Like, I'm sorry that I'm laughing at that, but it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, like, you can't do it. But I guess the thing that people might rightfully point out is if someone did that for, say, like Black Lightning to a white person, like swapping him from black to a white person, you might object. But also, there's nothing too inherent about Lex that does it. One could argue the fact that he was a redhead made him an outcast, and so he's a good candidate for being a person of color or something like that. But, you know, it's just not that big a deal either way. But that's And you know that's a fairish discussion. Not, I didn't mean to say a fairish discussion. I just stumbled. I meant to say that is a fair discussion. And that's it's a good point. But also, like you have to kind of look at it as like, well, if it was the original Power Ring and the original Atom, this would be an all-white team, and maybe at some point compromises need to be made or something like that. So I don't want to make a joke about it. It's just like, oh my god, we've been talking about it for like 50 years now, and at a certain point, I'm just over it, you know? And I don't mean to do that as a slight against Tevye personally or whatever. It's just, it's something I noticed that, like, I don't want to have the same conversation over and over again. And to be fair, by and large, this review isn't that. But it's just like, you know, we've put the, like, it feels like at a certain point we've put this issue to bed. We've talked about the particulars of that and when it is and isn't appropriate and stuff like that. And this really feels like an easy case of just not being a big deal. It's more interesting to me, and this part I think is particularly important, that we set this precedent that Lex Luthor can be many things, because down the road for stuff like casting, it would be interesting to have someone with like a cool presence or voice, regardless of what race they might be, playing Lex Luthor. And there's a lot of options out there. I was just thinking about like we have some really cool voice actors and like live action performers, and our last Lex Luthor live action felt as though there was a lot to be desired. No offense to Jesse Eisenberg, but I really think he was miscast. So, you know, maybe we just don't box ourselves in with anything in particular at this moment. I really want to keep an open mind for stuff like that, because, like, maybe like Gianco Esposito or something like that, or I don't know. Like, there's just a lot of people with interest in voices and presences and performances out there that I think could be pretty good for that role. Like Tony Jay or something like that would make a really cool Lex Luthor. He's getting a little old now, but someone like that would be pretty damn cool. David saying instead of race swapping Lex Luthor, they should give him some great luscious long hair. I mean, that would be fun. I was also thinking when I read that comment that there's the version of the Joker from Crisis on Two Earths that we see very briefly at the beginning. That's an actual gesture that I really love, and that's the sort of thing I want to see them play with too, because that was so great. And we don't see that version of the Joker very long, and same with the Joker in this book actually. But I feel like that guy has a lot of potential. It's like that Batman White Knight stuff where the Joker, like, not being in a villainous role is actually pretty interesting. Tebby's saying is about trying to do synergy with the Superman and Lois show, which, spoiler alert, didn't do that to Lex, and revealed the stranger to be Steo, which was really awesome. Oh, okay, well, they would probably know that, though, behind the scenes, so that feels like supposition. Like, unless they said that directly, that seems odd to me. Or, if it was, that's a pretty good mislead on DC's part. I haven't seen any of that Superman and Lois show, but I hear it's fantastic. And fortunately, it seems as though the CW verse or whatever is left of it is dead or dying. I'm surprised. At a certain point, it lasted as long as it did, but it was a shame because we did lose like Legends of Tomorrow with that and stuff. So that sucks because, well, I never got around to seeing Superman and Lois. Legends of Tomorrow was really awesome. Flash had overstayed its welcome at this point. I think it never really lived up to its potential from season one, but yeah, lots of potential out there. I do hope HBO Max manages to pull whatever mess it is together and do something. I hear Doom Patrol was canceled, which sucks. That was like my favorite on-air superhero show. So there's a lot to unpack in all of that, but you know, it's just like, yeah, anyways, unless that identity matters to a character, I really don't care what race they're depicted as or played as in terms of casting. And there's only a handful of characters where race matters. It does, and sometimes Hollywood does screw that up, but like, you know, a character like Black Panther, it matters. A character like you know, even Gambit, I would say they shouldn't play around with too much because that Cajun identity is specific and underrepresented in media. So I'd rather them, lean into the Cajun thing. Um, uh, but yeah, we're getting wildly off topic. But it is worth mentioning because Lex Luthor is race swapped. Honestly, it's part of why I kind of laughed when I heard that is because I hadn't even thought about it. Like, does that like I guess what from my perspective I've kind of moved on from such things, but maybe it's just interesting to talk about it in that light. Anyhow, JX3 says, "What would be a better intro to the what would be a better intro of the Crime Syndicate books besides this?" We talked about them a little bit at the beginning of the stream, but I will repeat them here. The movie Crisis on Two Earths is an animated movie, one of the DC's first in their long line of doing that. Like at a certain period, they did animated movies before, but they started to really consistently produce them along those lines. And in my opinion, it's one of the best I've seen. I haven't seen them all because there's a ton of them out there at this point, but of the ones I've seen, it's one of my favorites, and that's solid. Grant Morrison has a graphic novel called JLA Earth 2 that David Martinez reminded me existed, but I have read, and is extremely solid. Probably the best of a comic introduction to them. Their original appearance isn't terrible, but I'm mentioning it third for a reason. This is and then probably Forever Evil after that, which is the New 52 event, and then this is probably fifth after that. I think, because it does do some pretty solid introductions for each individual member of the team. But that was a good question. Thanks for asking that. Tevia says there was the original Earth 3 story in response to that. And yeah, like I said, that's a pretty solid one too. But in my opinion, it's weathered a little bit in time. You're probably better off with like a more modern take on them. And in my opinion, I think the best one is the one I got, but Crisis on Two Earths. I think it's just so nicely polished because it doesn't expect you to know anything other than like who the Justice League is, and it's a cool animated movie, so it's worth checking out. And in my opinion, one of, if not the best expression of the Crime Syndicate I've seen to date. Grant Morrison is going for something interesting with his books, but in terms of an introduction, I definitely think you're better served by the animated movie. So where was I in chat? Tevia say, oh yeah, Tevia is just saying that basically in chat, so I'm not going to repeat it, but Tevia agrees, which, I think most people can agree on those books and that movie being solid. It's all just really worth watching and reading, respectively. So David Martinez says, "It never really mattered to me if the team was all white. I care about the interactions between the characters and the Avengers together." I get that, but it's like, we can't speak for everyone and stuff, and it's not necessarily how we feel as grown adults kind of thing, if you get what I'm saying. It matters more for kids. It's about, just seeing yourself in these people. I was listening to a podcast where they're talking about that with like the queer experience, and just being able to confirm and validate to like kids especially that you exist and worth doing. Like, these companies are doing this for a reason, and there's a certain profit motive in it too, but it also is about making these things for everyone, and I definitely agree that there's value to that. So David Martinez says, in regards to my earlier comments, oof, Jesse Eisenberg was pretty awful as Lex Luthor. The more he was on screen, the worse it got. I agree. I definitely think there, even by the standards, well, not even standards, but even by the like acting landscape that existed 10 years ago, there were so many better options out there. Even if you wanted someone a little younger, I definitely think there's people who could have pulled off villainous a lot better than that. I'm not great at just pulling actors out of my head, but a creative like a casting agent can find those people for you, and can find someone who would have made a really good Lex Luthor. Get the guy who played him in Smallville to do it or something. That would have been cool to see him like going up against Henry Cavill, especially because he started out as a younger version of Lex Luthor in the Smallville series. and you don't even have to do that. It's just there's a lot of options out there is my point, and it feels like Zack Snyder, and I don't want to say be too hard on him because I do like the Snyder cut of Justice League and stuff, but it feels as though he almost went out of his way to pick a like actively bad version of Lex Luthor, where there are a lot of character actors who could have at least done something more passable and enjoyable. But anyways, I guess that is another issue, but it is relevant to like firming up the identity of Lex Luthor and what this villain is, or in this case, what this hero is, and making that interesting. I am not good at that kind of casting, and that's okay. I got a good one. I was thinking of like movies I had seen recently, and one that does come to mind. It would be different, but it should be interesting. It would be Brendan Fraser. I think Brendan Fraser would make a very interesting Lex Luthor. But there are so many others out there and stuff like that, and it does feel a little frustrating revisiting the Eisenberg days. But hopefully, with James Gunn in charge, we might see more interesting casting going forward and perhaps a little more on point. David Martinez, in reference to Jester, which is the version of Joker I was talking about earlier from the Crisis of Two Earths movie, was saying that Jester was awesome. And he also loved he also loved Red Hood from the alternate Earth of the Brave and the Bold show. Oh, I've seen some of the Brave and the Bold show, but I haven't seen what you're in reference to. But I love Brave and the Bold. And speaking of cool takes on the Joker, that version, and I think he was voiced by like John DiMaggio or something like that, but I really liked that version of the Joker. It kind of had like an old-timey gangster voice to him, and I'm sure not everyone enjoyed that, but that was great. That series is so fun. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it was such a wonderful expression of the Brave and the Bold series as it originally existed, but just beautifully animated and with so many great choices for voice actors. Solid recommend from me as well. David has been bringing up some interesting stuff. That's a little bit off the beaten path, but still fun animation worth talking about. Tevi is saying, I'm still surprised we didn't see Duala Dent's Joker's daughter in that Earth 3 book, which would have made a ton of sense considering in pre-Flashpoint she's Jester's daughter. Oh, I didn't know that actually, but that... from the like Teen Titan books. Okay. I didn't pick up on that, but that's interesting enough, I guess. I think this story stood out enough without any extra references. It feels like it was kind of carving out its own thing, but that's fair. Yeah, Tempe said like Blade as well. Crisis on Infinite Earths, yeah, did all that. David Martinez says, love the Justice League lineup for Crisis on Two Earths. Probably my favorite lineup. Yeah, I'm going to have to bring that up just because I just remember it being a solid cast and stuff. And I was always disappointed that they didn't rely on it a little bit more. Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, because you had... Wonder Woman, Flash as Wally West, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, and then Batman and Superman. Right, but it was mostly those four, I guess, going over. Oh yeah, I kind of remember all that now. It's coming back to me. Yeah. And Gina Torres was Superwoman, which was amazing because she's a solid performer, and that's kind of a perfect example of where playing around with race can really work in your favor. Because yes, Gina Torres is a black woman, but that was a solid performance. And she's such a good actress. I know her from like Firefly and stuff, but she was even on Angel, and she was in something recently. Oh yeah, Westworld. That was really good too. Teb is saying, speaking of Crime Syndicate, I'm surprised we didn't see the team again to invade the main DC universe, but maybe they don't really care about the multiverse. I take that as DC being a little wise. In spite of it being relatively long ago at this point, surprisingly so, New 52 was recent enough, I think, that that would be too similar for Forever Evil. And I think really, what can they offer that they didn't in like that story and all those tie-ins? I think until we have a writer or someone who has a different vision of that from what Jeff Johns pretty admirably delivered, because I've criticized Jeff Johns before, but I like Forever Evil. I don't think it's worth doing something like that again. I liked this. I think this was exactly what it should have been. I just wish that they had done a couple more standalone books outside of Starro, because that would have made this series, a little more hefty in terms of its content and having a bit more energy to it. Dave Martinez says, I'm Hispanic and I've never seen to see myself in characters. Race never mattered. They should portray them as every man so that everyone can relate to them. The thing about that, because it's easy to fall into that trap, and I've done that as someone who, is bisexual and is Jewish. Like, you don't get to speak to the rest of your community. It's like South Park said, like, Jesse Jackson isn't the president or isn't the king of all black people. And then it's like, oh, he told Stan's dad he is. But and I don't mean to be dismissive of your opinion or something like that, but it's just, it's just one of those things. Like, I can't speak for my communities and stuff like that, and shouldn't have to. So I understand that, like, this is a debate, but to say race never mattered is a bit dismissive of, like, your own community's feelings about this sometimes, and how other people, like, in that experience might not necessarily share that opinion and stuff like that. So I get it, and I do appreciate, like, you're having a conversation. I don't want to dismiss any of that, but I definitely feel that this is something that DC can work on without necessarily ruining their own material. And everyone's loved the Crisis on Two Earths movie, and that definitely did do the same and kind of cast in a way that was relatively willing to swap races when it saw fit. Like, a black woman plays Gina Torres does play Superwoman, and I think that is worth remembering and stuff like that. I didn't even know that going into this. I just think it's interesting and relevant. But David Martinez is saying love Brendan Fraser in anything. Yeah, I was thinking of that because I saw The Whale, and he was really strong in that, and definitely a movie worth watching. Very different from any sort of comic book movie, but he's also in Doom Patrol and stuff. And the reason I brought him up is just he's a solid example of someone who can really potentially do something a little different for Lex Luthor, and would have been awesome, or would be awesome going forward, because his career has kind of entered into some sort of renaissance after having so many health struggles. So and that was really nice to see. Like, that's an interesting angle to The Whale, and part of why it works, I think, is it's a weirdly interesting metaphor for Brendan Fraser's own life, and you can feel a lot of, like, him putting himself into that role, even if he is under prosthetics and stuff. But yeah, I think we're getting real off topic. I apologize. I really hope I didn't step on either of your toes too much, David or Tevya. I don't, we were, having a conversation and talking about it in a way I hope that no one, got offended or anything like that. But it's just interesting. It's just because it's something that I barely even noticed when I was reading these books. Like, oh, like, Luthor's vaguely more darkly colored in a way that really isn't all that distinct from how he was drawn in a lot of the Justice League cartoons. So I barely blinked an eye, and maybe that's why I pushed back a little bit, because sometimes it kind of feels like you have to ask the question, where's the poop? Like, what's the big deal when we have, like, a fun story, and this story focused almost as much as Starro over, like, anything about ethnicity. So is it really such a big deal? But that's just my opinion, and you guys are welcome to share yours. And I really appreciate you both in chat and stuff because you guys had a lot of really cool stuff to say too. And I don't think either of you were being racist or anything like that. I think that's where people get prickly around these kind of conversations because really I'm not accusing either of you of such thing. Obviously, like I think both of you are people of color if I recall correctly, but it's worth I think talking about these things and exploring these ideas a little bit and you know I'm not the one who brought it up anyways. I say that just because it's like, oh man, we just had to do a whole thing like that with Dr. Voodoo. David was saying, personally, I see voice acting is different. The actor doesn't have to look like the character to voice them. And that's fair. And there's a lot of examples of that going all over the place in fiction. And I agree with you fully on that. I think that leads to an ideal circumstance anyways, where in most cases, unless we're talking about like a heavy accent, and like a character really associated with a certain ethnicity, yeah, you can be pretty willy-nilly about that. And even with a character like that, here's an example that I'm thinking of. So you have someone like Black Panther, who's usually got a pretty overt African accent to him, and it's almost expected of the character, I'd say. You can have different black people from different countries use that accent if they're able to adequately and like plausibly do it, just like how a British person can easily do like an American accent. So I definitely think David has a really solid point there about like, yeah, you know, voice acting is a little different and can be a lot more race blind in its casting and stuff. And that is fair. And, you know, I guess when we talk about it, it's also a question of, well, what about Superman and stuff like that? And, you know, that definitely becomes more debatable. It's one of those things where it's like, well, Henry Cavill's awesome, so why not just use him? And every once in a while you find someone who really embodies this role, like Cavill or Christopher Reeves. And as long as they can do that, I think that's what's most important. And maybe we'll leave it at that, because I think we could all agree with that. But David's saying, very interesting conversation. Thanks for listening. And I think that's a good way of putting it. Like, I definitely, you know, just because I'm disagreeing and even pushing back a little bit, and I can get a little, we'll say, aggressive in my debate style, or I don't know. I've taken classes just in university, and not even specifically for this reason, on like reasoning and logic and forming a debate and making an argument to the point that I feel like I can kind of like overwhelm people a little bit, and they feel like they can't make their point coherently, or that I'm just shutting it down no matter what. So I do try and give people like leeway and a sense of like, hey, it's it's not that big a deal, and we can have like a fun chat, you know. Aggressively Relaxing says, this weird casting criticism only exists for productions that have lots of money. Otherwise, it's just that little girl did a great job as Abraham Lincoln. Solid point. I had to read your comment just to get what you were going for a second there, but and I think that's fair too, because, well, and that's where like context is everything, and context is really an underlying theme of what we've talked about a lot. Sometimes changing or playing around with casting a little bit just because maybe the casting director came across an interesting performer, like it matters more when like the budget's out there and stuff like that. So I'm going to give a good example. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has very specific descriptions of its characters and very specific descriptions of all those Stark children, for example. So we had, and I'm really thinking of like Sansa, Arya, and Bran. Not only in terms of like what they look like, but they had a lot of check marks to check, you know. They had to be British, or at least be very convincing with a British accent. They had to act, and not only act, but act really well and dealing with really challenging roles. And they had to look and be the right age for what they were going for with these characters. A lot of boxes to check, and really you're looking at a very narrow window of kids who are the right age, the right acting ability, the right parents, because you don't want crazy parents in your production, and the right level of chill where like they can handle this kind of material and understand it, even if some of the adults content was like actively being censored from them in those days, and they couldn't really read the books, but they could still understand the role they were going for. And you have this big budget HBO show, and I think it's realistic to have expected that of them. And had they failed at casting Sansa, Bran, Arya, I forgot her name for a second, even though I had just said it a few minutes ago, it would have ruined the whole thing. Well, not a whole thing, but it would have been something people would have noticed and complained about. But I think they really nailed the casting of those kids, especially back in the early days of the show. Obviously, the show went off the rails and stuff, but that had nothing to do with the casting. Casting was really good for that show. But let's say it wasn't HBO. Let's say it was Big Finish. I don't know if you've heard of Big Finish. They do audio dramas for Doctor Who and stuff. I've been getting into them more and more lately. I give Big Finish a lot more of a pass for their content when it comes to casting, because they have far more limited resources than a massive network that has its own streaming service now, like HBO, and was always like this high budget premium channel. Expectations are different, so I think Aggressively Relaxing had a good point there. But I am just going to add that, yeah, like the context really matters and stuff. And I think also what he's there getting at, I guess, it matters even more in the sense of, it's like, well, like, who cares so much about the race of these characters and stuff, like, or so much as the job they did? I don't think anyone would care about what race Lex Luthor is, and I don't think we would be spending as much time talking about it for this series if the story was better. And I think we can all agree on that. And it's not like the story was that bad or anything like that. I think I've conveyed that, you know, it's in the middle of the road in terms of Crime Syndicate stories. It's not the best out there, but it's not the worst either. But it definitely is one of those things where if it had more in it for us to talk about, we probably wouldn't keep coming back to this casting stuff and other weird details about other productions, as I and chat keep getting us off topic with it. But I don't mind. It's been a fun discussion, so I've been happy to lean into it. But that, I think Aggressively Relaxing had a really solid point there on a couple of levels that was worth exploring. So I assume by now you're all tired of hearing me talk about this stuff, and I don't have much else to say. I've caught up with chat. I'm feeling good about it all. Thanks again for everyone's comments. Really interesting stuff. And David said, true, story should have been better. Yeah. It's weird to come back or to just do a review in general where it's not terrible, it's not good, it's just, it was okay. But I think it was worth talking about. It ended up being a really interesting discussion. Obviously, I had no intention to talk about Lex Luthor or any of those stuff about his casting other than just his role in this story. So we didn't come into it doing all of this stuff, but I never really know where these streams are going to go like that. I'm kind of glad we ended up having that discussion. Oh, hey. KJX, thanks for the $5. Oh, okay. DC Enchantress versus MC Enchantress. I assume you mean... Oh, yeah, Marvel Comics Enchantress. Took me a second. I was like, you mean the Marvel one. Interesting questions. Thank you for the $5, first of all. I'm going to have to say Marvel's Enchantress. Aggressively Relaxing is going with DC. Here, I'll even do you a favor, buddy. Because you were so nice to donate, I'll make us a little poll when I find it. Here. I'm just going to do Enchantress for the question, and then we'll do DC, Marvel. I hope we're talking about DC and Marvel. I assume that's what you meant with MC. So yeah, everyone can vote. My personal vote is going to be for Marvel because... And I said all that, and then I knew the second I said it that it's like, oh, but I am biased. And the bias to me, I think, is I was first introduced to the Marvel Enchantress. That's the character that I first encountered, so I have that internal sense of, oh, that's the real Enchantress. That's the one that I grew up with, so that's the one that I like. She teams up with Loki and does stuff like that in the Avengers books. But I recognize that that's not the most rational argument in the world, and it's definitely a personal preference. I found her really fun in the Injustice video game, for example, when she was that DLC character. I think in Injustice 2, as like, and it was done obviously as a tie-in to the Suicide Squad movie, but I found she was pretty well portrayed by Cara Delevingne, and she wasn't necessarily a bad villain for that movie. It's just that movie wasn't necessarily great, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the writer of that movie, so you know that might bias me a little bit. I honestly thought when we met Sylvie or whatever her name is in the Loki show, the female version of Loki, that was going to be Enchantress, and I was pretty excited for that. So I'm still interested. Deadhouse asks, "This is one I would rather smash." I mean, for me personally, that's going to be the Marvel version either way. KJX just asked which of the two in terms of a straight versus question, which to be fair, I was just going with my favorite character is how I interpreted it, but they could also be asking a fight scenario, which is interesting too, because I didn't interpret that until just now, but I will explore that idea, especially, you know, since he was kind enough to donate. I feel as though, based on what I've seen with these two characters, Enchantress's magic feels more primordial and powerful, especially after the Suicide Squad movie kind of established certain precedent, like, oh, she can summon these weird booger monster things and stuff like that, versus MC Enchantress feels more like a sorceress, defined by certain logistics within the Asgardian pantheon of power and stuff like that. And for example, I can't imagine Enchantress taking on a character like Odin or something like that, versus DC Enchantress. Maybe she could actually give Odin a little bit of a fight. So yeah, in combat, I would actually probably go DC. Tevi is saying, "Oh, speaking of which, we got a new Flash trailer. That's cool. I haven't seen the other. I have seen the other Flash trailer. Haven't seen the new one, so I can open it up. Sure." I have desktop audio muted, and I'm not going to unmute it because I don't feel the need to get demonetized over something like that. But I will look at this trailer. Here, where are my headphones? So you guys won't be able to hear this, but I will, and I'll let you know what I think. Yeah, I mean, DC shouldn't care too much if I have momentous and intense at this point. Like, it's cool seeing Supergirl. Like, this movie looks really interesting and is very exciting. Let's get nuts. Oh man, that shot looks so awesome. I know you guys are only seeing a little segmented bit of it. I kind of am doing that for copyright reasons, but you guys can at least see when I'm seeing in the trailer and stuff. I am excited for streaming that for whatever reason. My internet's not that bad. That's great. The only thing about that little moment at the end of the trailer I will say is that's very Avengers-y, jokey kind of stuff that has been dragging down some of these recent comic book movies a bit. But, you know, yeah, that did leave me excited. I'm also excited for the next Guardians movie, which is just around the corner. Some people have probably already seen it by now. I don't know, like with the premieres or whatever, but I'm looking forward to that. Anyways, thanks for letting me know. Aggressively Relaxing says, yeah, that trailer looks great. It looks really good. That shot where the Flash and Batman and what's it called, Superwoman are all lined up, that was awesome. Tevia's gonna upload their reaction as well to the trailer. Good for you, man. Yeah, Tevia's got a channel. You can actually, I think it's a neat feature in chat. You can click on Tevia's name and see his channel if you guys are curious. He's been saying a lot of stuff in chat, so if you want to hear more from them, by all means, click on his username, I believe. Yeah, I can check. Yeah. Oh, it might not let me in YouTube Studio, but I'm pretty sure that's true. David, what show was David talking about? Because Deadhouse was saying that show is fantastic. Criminal that I got killed after only 2 seasons. I'm pretty sure Doom Patrol was 3 seasons, so I'm not sure what... Oh, Brave and the Bold. Gotcha. I had to remember what show he had brought up. Uh, Deadhouse says the stuff they've done to correct you screams big drug problems. I agree. There's something's wrong with Ezra Miller in terms of mental health, either addiction or some other issue, and I hope they get the help that they clearly need. But uh, you can't do that to people and then be in like some of the biggest movies in the world, at least not without serious rehabilitation and serious treatment and a serious course correction, because it's happened more than once now. Like, once is a mistake and the point at which you need treatment. Twice, and you're abducting people and doing all these violent things to them is unacceptable. And the thing I said, like, what's nice about it, the only solace I take is that no one seems to disagree. Also, crazily enough, we're tied in the DC versus Marvel Enchantress vote, which is pretty funny. Uh, but I guess I can't vote in it, so if it does come down to that, I guess I did tip it off to the Marvel direction. But there you go. It is just funny to hear from other people. Tevi's saying I'm looking forward to Michael Keaton and the actress who plays Supergirl. Me too. It looks very exciting. Deadhouse says, as much as I love Snyder's casting, I want a hard reboot personally. I sadly think it's necessary. Although I've liked stuff along the way, like the Suicide Squad, which seems to be staying, by the way, based on the announced stuff. Like, that's going to be canon. Stuff, and like even Black Adam I enjoyed enough. It feels like we've had enough of a weird, sprawling mess of movies and reboots and an edited version of Justice League that's tainted because like not everyone has seen the Snyder cuts. So too many people have the Joss Whedon version in their head. There are, the diehard Snyder fans who are gonna, I think, forever be oriented against the James Gunn thing, and I feel as though I've been pretty fair to Zack Snyder. I liked the Snyder cut of Justice League. I think it's vastly better than the Joss Whedon version, but also just good in its own right. It's long, but it should have been 2 movies to begin with, and that wasn't his fault. So, it wouldn't have been the end of the world to keep him around, but I understand James Gunn looking over this mess and being like, we need to do something about it. And also, he has the prime opportunity to do it because we know from these trailers that Flashpoint is happening. So they are broadcasting it as loud as they can that reboot is in the cards. And I think it's time to do it. David Martinez, I just saw in chat, said agreed, hard reboot, put in the work and lay out the foundation. Yeah, I think we're all agreeing with you, Deadhouse. David Martinez says, I hope they don't keep Ezra as the Flash. I mean, he's a liability at this point. He's going to constantly distract from the movies that he released. Oh, I've done it. They're going to constantly distract from the releases as they go along. It's just going to be a mess. Ezra Miller's got to go. The fact that they're non-binary or whatever is irrelevant. They're a problem. And, it's just because they're a criminal doesn't mean that they should be misgendered. Out of all non-binary people, they are among the least sympathetic of them, but of deserving that courtesy. But for other non-binary people, they deserve that respect, and we can criticize everything else about them. Yeah, and even then, with stigma around mental health, I'm not even saying Ezra Miller can't ever play the Flash again, but it's a long road to that point. And I think people can understand why, because if you are doing those things, if any person is doing those things, that person needs treatment. That person needs to have a long treatment schedule where they aren't working 12-hour days of filming for like 3 weeks in a row. You can't do that. So Ezra Miller, just for health reasons, has to go. And maybe it is worth mentioning that as much as they've victimized others, and that shouldn't be forgotten, it's also, like people have said in chat, screams mental health issues of some form or another. David Martinez, on a brighter note, was talking about Brave and the Bold, since we've brought it up a couple times. Love the show. We were so close to getting fully realized Marvel Universe in animation. Marvel? I'm not sure what you. I think you might have misspoke there, or maybe you guys are talking about a different. Oh, they're talking about the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes show. I must have missed that in chat. Thank you for explaining that. I liked that show too. They did kind of continue it with a different version that, by all accounts, is much, much worse. So it sucks that that all happened. And yeah, that was a cute little Avengers show and a great way to get kids more familiarized with Avengers characters. And that's how you lead to biases, like earlier when I was being asked which Enchantress I preferred. It's because I was exposed to the Marvel Enchantress first, and good shows and content along those lines will do that. I think I got introduced to Enchantress by her appearing in one of those 90s cartoons in some form or another. And that works. Tevi's saying Young Justice is also a great show as well. Yep. A good example of exactly what we were just talking about, of introducing people to those characters and stuff and getting them to be fans of characters that aren't just in the Justice League and stuff like that. Tevi is saying, I'm curious on how this Flash movie, when it ends, will keep some elements or not give this movie... what? Or not given this movie... is built to be a reboot similar to Flashpoint comic. Even technically speaking, Flashpoint wasn't supposed to be a reboot when it first started out. Part of me still wanted Henry Cavill to get one more chance of Superman, but since we're not getting this point, I'm going to move on. I mean, I think it's what we all have to do. I don't necessarily disagree. It would have been nice to see Henry Cavill as Superman again, and I definitely was kind of optimistic after the end of Black Adam. But, you know, they are playing coy about some of that casting stuff here and there, to the point where I do wonder if maybe we shouldn't eliminate that possibility just yet. I don't have any concrete information on that. I do feel as though the headlines and the way people talk about James Gunn's DC, like, new direction and stuff, seems a little more, I don't want to say overplayed, but just like overstated, I guess. Yes, they are making changes. Yes, James Gunn is pushing everything in a new direction and kind of getting rid of some of the old stuff in the DC movies that weren't working, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to abandon everything that's good from that era. And when he was announcing that new, like, kind of pseudo Suicide Squad sequel that he's making, it seemed to draw a lot from what already exists and that sort of thing. So I don't necessarily know if everything's being abandoned. On the other hand, stuff like Shazam seems like they're in a pretty rough position based on the reception of that movie. I don't know how it did in box office, but my guess is not great. So I think that stuff's in more trouble. Tubby's saying Avengers Assembled wasn't a sequel. I mean that in like a spiritual sequel. I should clarify it. I agree. I know it's not a sequel, and you are right. Didn't continue anything from that show, but it did its own thing, which failed. All true. That is a better clarification of that. Ted House says Ezra Miller should try playing the role of a good person. That is funny, and did get a laugh in chat. David is saying the only thing I like about the Avengers Assemble series was the Inhumans and seeing the Squadron Supreme. Honestly, I didn't even get that far, so good on you for being more patient than me. Tiffy is saying that he was also optimistic at the ending of Black Adam. It made me so bally. I assume you mean excited in some form or another. Yeah, and it is a bit disappointing that they apparently aren't going to follow through with that, and maybe not even on Black Adam, which I think is a bit disappointing. David Martinez says they should have never made a Black Adam movie. They don't need to make a movie for every supporting character. Okay, I mean, I think Black Adam's a cool enough character that I wouldn't call him a supporting character, but that's your opinion. And that really is, like, you know, it's your opinion, and my opinion is I disagree. Like, that really is just a, like, you know, personal thing, and that's fine. But personally, I enjoyed Black Adam. I understand why other people didn't, but after, like, Shazam 2, Ant-Man 3, and what was that other dud recently? I guess Thor Love and Thunder and some of the other lackluster comic book movies recently, Black Adam felt at least somewhat refreshing. But, you know, like, again, that's just an opinion. Tavi is saying, I was happy to see Henry Cavill appear at the end of Black Adam, which was really awesome and made me so happy, but was immediately crushed when I heard that he was out. I personally like Fear of the Gods. It was tons of fun. You know, then that gets into the subjective thing. Like, I personally like Black Adam, and it was tons of fun. Not everyone's gonna agree. David Martinez says, I would have preferred a movie where Superman and Shazam team up to take down Black Adam instead. Oh, yeah, don't get me wrong. We're all with you there, friend. We're all disappointed that Black Adam for some reason didn't appear in 2 Shazam movies. That is ridiculous. And that gets into apparently like a little bit of an ego thing with Black Adam, or not Black Adam, The Rock, and not wanting to do that and disagreeing about X, Y, and Z. And no. The idea, apparently, like, he prevented any Black Adam characters from appearing in Shazam 2, and that is so disappointing because that you're fighting against what Black Adam is. Yes, I'm fine with Black Adam having his own standalone stories, but for it to not cross over with such an obvious opportunity to do so in a way that would make sense and maybe confuse people a little less with having 2 similarly looking superheroes just colored differently and having movies released almost back to back from DC, it's such a missed opportunity. Yeah, if that's where your criticism is mostly couched in, I agree with you. I just think that Black Adam's like an interesting enough character. You can kind of do both. He can play a villainous role or an antagonist role in the Shazam movies while also getting his own movies, and that's kind of fun. He's one of some villains out there that I think are worthy of that. And I definitely agree with you that there are plenty of villains out there that don't deserve their own movie or don't necessarily merit it at this time. And that includes most of Shazam's villains, for example, like Mr. Mind and Dr. Sivana, and even the weird villains from Fury of the Gods. They all feel as though they would be perfectly incapable of carrying their own movie, but make great villains for Shazam. David loved Shazam Fury of the Gods, which is pretty cool. That's interesting because it's just interesting different opinions. Like you can like one and not the other, and I'm the opposite. I find that an interesting dichotomy. Tev is saying we technically did get that with a DC animated movie, and seeing that in live action would have been really awesome. I agree. And, it's one of those things where it's cool seeing animated movies do that, and I'm always for it, but I feel like there's room to do both and for both to try different things. I feel as though live action just creates these logistics around it where, by its nature, it's never going to look like those animated movies. It's never going to be quite the same story or feel that way, so you might as well embrace it and have fun with that, and there's room to do that. But I forgot they did that. I haven't seen that movie. Maybe that's what David was saying. Yeah, David was talking about the Superman Shazam animated movie. I realized that just as I saw your message in chat. But I've seen that one. It's good. They definitely should have done something like that at some point instead of like what they ended up doing with Black Adam and Shazam, because that might be it for these characters for a long, long time until they can reappear in Justice League or Justice Society at some point, and even then, who knows if that's going to happen. But it was kind of cool seeing that ending because there's precedent for Shazam being in the Justice Society, so I was a little excited by that moment at the post-credits bit. Tevi is also saying, I still call him Captain Marvel, Billy Batson, and Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. That's their original name, but that's just my opinion. I mean, it's going to get to the point that people aren't going to know who you're talking about easily, but or you have to use 4 names to make it clear, as opposed to just Shazam. But you do you. I know I'm kind of alone on that. I think it's just sensible to accept that at this point, but and to fans' credit, DC spent a long time not doing that and only really recently started embracing the Shazam name, but I think it's for the best. But again, that's just my opinion. On the other hand, the Shazamily, as they called it in the movie, that was a terrible name. We didn't mention that in our review of the Shazam thing because it didn't really click in that that's what it was referred to, but that is just so kitsch and we got to appeal to the kids, that sort of thing. And yeah, anyways, if you liked the Shazam 2 movie, good for you, but I did not. So we've spent a long time talking about other stuff. I kind of agreed to do so because what's his face? I'm gonna pull the name up right now. Key, I believe it was, JZ was kind enough to donate. So thanks for doing that, and thanks to everyone to do that. Yeah, Deadhouse saying calling him Shazam makes sense. How does he introduce himself to people? Exactly. But also, thank you, Deadhouse, because usually when I bring it up in chat, everyone disagrees with me, and it's fine. It's just a little frustrating because it's like I know I'm not crazy. I know this is a rational thing to do, aside from the legal implications, and just so it's understandable for us comic book fans, but to people like my partner and more casual fans of comic books and these superhero stuff, it is so confusing to them. Deadhouse says, "Hi, my name is Shazam. Trans." Oh, Deadhouse was saying it makes no sense. Ah, so never mind. He is disagreeing with me. Ah, see, I was right. Everyone is disagreeing with me. Deadhouse says, "Hi, my name is Shazam." Transforms into a little kid. I mean, that's a fair point, but that just, I don't know. Oh, interesting. But why is he called Captain Marvel then? He's called, and the answer to that is because it was made by Fawcett Comics, which is a weird detail, but I digress. And of course, David Martinez also agrees with the Captain Marvel name, but yeah, I digress. There is, two different types of Enchantress, but these things confuse people, and it also leads to companies doing this situation where it's like, well, Suicide Squad did Enchantress first, so who knows if we'll ever see Marvel's Enchantress anytime soon. And I think that's relevant. Shazam is how we get Shazam stuff. And also maybe it can just lead to comedy with Deadhouse. I don't dislike the name. It's just a huge problem. I honestly don't have an answer to your point, Shazam. That's weird. He either has to tell people his name is Billy, or he does say Shazam and comically turns into Billy. Both of which is funny, and kind of is an inverse of like how Black Adam used to get tricked in his original appearances in the comics. But you're right. Like I kind of got quiet to that because it's like, you know what, that's a solid point, and I don't have a good reply. Deadhouse says, "I think Mary Marvel is public domain." That's crazy if true. It's possible. Fawcett Comics are old enough. I don't really know what's what with that. I'd have to look into it. But Tevye says, "Yeah, Fawcett Comics owns the rights to Captain Marvel and the Marvel family." Oh, I didn't know that's how they got it. I knew it was a copyright dispute. I just assumed they finally agreed that it was just ridiculous relative to Marvel Comics and got tired of that distinction and knew if they wanted to make a movie, they'd have to do something about that. But who knows? David Martinez says, "There's a funny Shazam joke in the Justice League action. After they swap bodies with Firestorm, he ends up in Shazam's bodies. He keeps saying the name and keeps transforming." Oh, I'll have to check out that. I've heard of the Justice League action, seen little bits of people saying good stuff about it, but haven't actually read any of it myself, so I will have to check that out. Here, I'm going to add that to my list. A very long list of stuff people want me to look at. But, and you didn't even ask, David Martinez. That just seems like a cool thing for me to read. So thank you. Yeah. I think we'll call it there, but because I've been, it's been an hour and 20 minutes and people are honking outside for some reason. But thank you so much, everyone in chat. It was a lively discussion and a nice long one too for a series like this. I might retitle this Flash reaction or whatever. Tevy's saying, well, DC didn't keep the copyright of Captain Marvel names. Marvel got the rights to the Captain Marvel name. Oh, and David Martinez is saying it's a show. So they own the show specifically or something. Justice League Action is a show. That's interesting. Well, I didn't realize that. Is it new then? Because I heard people talking about it and assumed it was like a comic book series, but I am apparently mistaken. Oh, it's like old. And I just somehow missed it. Well, I've never even seen a clip of that. Oh, okay. I kind of recognize this animation. Is it related to that Batman series from back in the day? Because it kind of looks similar to that. Anyways, yeah, Deadhouse says it's more of a kiddie show. Okay. Well, anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. I've said goodbye for a while now, but I think we'll leave it at there. And yeah, have a good day, everybody. Thanks for